Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this year's Glendale Dieppe Jane's Walk. Now, of course, Jane's Walks usually take place on the first weekend here in May, which we are at. Many places have canceled them or postponed them for this year, but we decided to do a virtual Facebook Live one because we wanted to make sure that everybody could enjoy this with us from the comfort of their home. Now, these are called Jane's Walks because they're named after Jane Jacobs. Jane was many things, but one of the things she also was a community activist. And one of the things she believed is that to have better communities, we need to know our communities. We need to understand them, walk them, talk about the history, talk about what makes our communities what they are. And the Jane's Walks were started in her honor following her death, and we continue that tradition here in Lethbridge to show you what our communities are. So this is the second Glendale Dieppe Jane's Walk. Last year we focused on Dieppe. This year we're going to focus on Glendale. Glendale's a little younger than Dieppe, but just a little bit younger. And in fact, we get the beginning here in 1949. Now, you probably should know who exactly you're listening to. Hiding behind the camera, and she gets to hide today, is Jen Schmidt-Rempel. She's going to be doing the camera work. My name is Belinda Crowson. Because this is Facebook Live, we're going to be dealing with noisy streets, so work with us on that. But Facebook Live also allows you to ask questions and pose comments in the online as well. And not only comments and questions about this walk, but if you have comments and questions about Glendale Dieppe overall, things you'd like to see, stories you'd like to share, please include them. Who knows, you might inspire the third walk next year. This also will be a bit of a shortened walk over what we had originally planned. We had a few guest speakers and a few more members of the committee who won't be able to join us today. So we'll include their stories in future years, but we wanted to do something, so here we are. So as I said, welcome to Glendale. Glendale has its start in 1949 when Michael Harris and Leonard M. Bruchet, owners of Lethbridge Properties Company, began the development of the land in the Glendale area. And Glendale is the land east of Mayor McGrath Drive, west of 28th Street, and from 6th Avenue South to Highway 3. So we are standing in Glendale. Now, I've never found a definitive reason for why they called it Glendale. My assumption is they named it after Glendale, California. When I do research through the old newspapers, I find a lot of connections between Lethbridge and Glendale. People would often spend their winters down there. Some people from Lethbridge retired down there. And I see quite a few connections between the communities. So I make the assumption that that is where the name comes from. But if you have a different answer or if you know more about it, please let us know. Strips of block, beginning with the area south of 5th Avenue, and we are standing on 5th Avenue right now, were subdivided, started in 1949. And they moved north as they developed Glendale, with the last area, the area north of 3rd Avenue, subdivided in 1953, which essentially means construction of Glendale went from the south to the north. Harris and Bruchet also wanted to have a certain type of community. You have to realize the context we're dealing with, 1949, 1953. We're in the middle of the baby boom. We're right after the Second World War. We're seeing an excitement about the growth and potential of Canada and of what we would call the Western world at that time. And they wanted to have a certain type of neighborhood. So one of the things they did when developing Glendale is they actually set construction restrictions on the lots. So if you were building along 6th Avenue South, for example, in Glendale, your house had to be worth at least $12,000 at that time. Other areas in Glendale had an $8,000 dwelling restriction. So there were some rules set up. This gives us throughout Glendale some very nice lots and some nice houses for the 1950s and 60s construction. This is also very much a post-World War II, post-Second World War construction area. Now, one of the things that sets Glendale apart from Dieppe, Dieppe was very specific that it had to be for veterans and their families. And while we do see some veterans move into Glendale, we also see a lot more people. One of the things I found interesting was the number of retired farmers who moved here, or people who had lived elsewhere prior to the war and then decided to move here. So we get quite an assortment of people who move into Glendale at that time, and we see a varied community. Now, as the community is developed, it also gets commercial space. And the commercial space, the largest commercial space, of course, is right across the street from us. Built in 1956, this was originally known as Shoppers World. It was constructed originally in 1956 at a cost of $1 million. It was a huge construction for the time, and it was described as the largest shopping center of its kind in Canada when it opened. The mall was developed by Art Batty. It was an open-air facility with a covered walkway under which people could move from store to store. Now, as I say, this building, or what was Shoppers World, was an Art Batty construction. So the first question you might have is, who exactly was Art Batty? In 1947, following the Second World War, Art Batty returned to Lethbridge, and he had at that time $2,600 from his service pay and other funds. That next year, 1948, he used that money to start Art Batty construction. He started with one site. What he did was he constructed a basement, and then he and his wife moved into the basement, and then he started framing the top of the house, and before the house was even finished, he sold the unfinished house, making a $2,000 profit on the house. Obviously, he knew then what he wanted to do, and from that humble beginning, he went on to build Shoppers World and over 1,300 houses here in Lethbridge. And he became one of the largest construction companies in Lethbridge in those years following the Second World War. Batty had a profound effect on our Glendale district. He built many of the houses here. Well, saying he built many of the houses is an understatement. The record I found is that the Art Batty Company built 90% of the houses in Glendale. So if you live in an original Glendale house, chances are you're in an Art Batty house, or you're one of the 10% who had another construction company. But let's go back to a little bit more about Shoppers World. So Shoppers World, 1956, when it opened, there were 17 businesses originally. And I'm sure some of you might remember some of them. The largest business in 1956 was the Dominion Town and Country Supermarket, which was located where the Sandman Hotel is today. Other businesses there in 1956 were Dr. H.L. Matkin, the dentist, Halifax Gift Shop, Tamblin's Drugstore, Jones Brown Rugs, Bank of Nova Scotia, Parsons Hardware and Appliances, Andy's Apache Lounge Restaurant, Enzo's Barbershop, Fremstad's Radio and TV, the Dairy Bar, Art Batty's own construction offices, Dual Craft, and Perkinson and McKeague Real Estate. Now, Shoppers World has had many changes over the years. There's been fires, businesses have changed, the construction of the place has changed over the years. It's also gone through some name changes. In 1971, it was renamed Holiday Village Mall, then the Lethbridge Inn Plaza, and now Sandman Inn Plaza since 1982. In 1972, the building that is now the Sandman Hotel was constructed. One thing about this hotel, it had the first elevated swimming pool ever built in Lethbridge. A couple of other interesting points about what was Shoppers World, which is now the Sandman Inn Plaza, is that it had the first A&W ever opened in Lethbridge. And the first A&W opened here in 1959 and operated from this site for the next 11 years. When the A&W closed here in 1970, Bill Morgan, the owner, moved his business a little further south on Mare McGrath Drive and opened an A&W further down the road. When the A&W moved out, it left an opening in Shoppers World, or in the Holiday Village Inn as it was, or Holiday Village Mall as it was at that time. And in 1971, 7-Eleven moved in. And this 7-Eleven that we still have here was the first 7-Eleven in Lethbridge, opened on this site. So the first A&W and the first 7-Eleven were in this mall, and both in the exact same spot. Now, I know we could continue talking about Shoppers World for much longer. I'm sure many of you have stories, but we need to start moving down Fifth Avenue. We're going to stop and look at two of the apartment buildings that are left in this neighborhood, and then we're going to go look at some houses on 24th Street South. Now, from my perspective, this is kind of the strange part, because if you were with us, you'd be walking with us, but now you get to just enjoy some of the scenery as Jen shows you everything but me walking. We'll stop right on the corner. So when Glendale was constructed, it originally had 4 apartment buildings. There were apartment buildings on 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue. And what they sort of did, they were the introduction to the community. You had to pass the apartment buildings before you went into the neighborhood. We have over the years lost already 2 of the apartment buildings. These 2 here are the only 2 still standing. And the Diamond Apartments buildings on the north side of 5th Avenue do not look like we're going to have them much longer, which means that this apartment building here on 23rd Street will be the last of the 4 apartment buildings built in the original design of Glendale in that 1949-1953 time period. So certainly it changed the neighborhood as the apartment buildings are disappearing. But let's continue one more block to 24th Street. So you'll notice on our tour as we head south on 24th Street, we're staying between 5th and 6th Avenues this year. And that means we're in that oldest section of Glendale, that part that was subdivided in 1949. And we're going to move down this road to find the home of Donald and Grace Lingard. How are you this afternoon or this morning?
Belinda,
how are you?
What are you doing out?
We are doing a tour of the Janes Walk, but we're doing the Janes Walk tour for our neighborhood, but we're doing it on Facebook Live.
Wrong neighborhood, you silly poop.
This is Glendale. We're doing Glendale.
Oh, you're forgiven then. Whatever you are.
You can watch it on Facebook, or we can send you a link, because we're doing a tour of about a third of the Glendale neighborhood this time.
Why?
Why? Because last year we did Dieppe, and this year I want to do my neighborhood.
You live in this neighborhood?
Yep.
Oh, I'll be darned. I did not know that.
A couple blocks over that way.
Okay. A nice neighborhood.
It is.
Okay, so now you're in this neighborhood.
Well, 19 years.
What's happening with that?
The Diamond Apartment buildings.
Yeah.
And we just mentioned that on the tour. What I understand is just gossip online is that it's going down and being replaced.
Well, I heard the same thing. And then the neighbor across the alley, forget his name right now, I said that to him. He said, no, I was just over there. There was a white truck, and it's a new owner, and he's going to redo it condominiums.
Oh, even better.
So I thought, okay.
See, we get good information on Jane's Walk tours.
Not necessarily accurate, but
Well, now we have two different versions of the story. We'll see which one turns out to be the truth.
I'm alive to fix it.
I hope they keep it. We were saying there were originally 4 apartment buildings in Glendale. And those 2 over on 5th Avenue and 23rd are the only 2 left. So it'd be a shame to lose them.
Right over here?
Those are the last 2 apartment buildings that were built here in the 50s in this neighborhood.
Well, when were those done on 28?
That's in Dieppe. If they're on the other side,
Okay. All right.
yeah. I mean, it's all one neighborhood now, but at the beginning it wasn't.
So 28 was kind of the demarcation line?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good to know. You still do the graveyards?
No, I don't do those anymore.
Okay.
But
She was good.
Yeah, I did a few of
Oh,
her
all
graveyard
right.
tours, asking her questions,
Yeah, well,
quizzing her on the stuff.
she got my interest going,
I know my dead people.
Yeah.
but now you can find it all on Find a Grave. You
Um,
don't have to do it.
not all of it.
No, sometimes they miss one
Yeah,
or two.
and always the interesting ones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we better keep going.
Sorry to interrupt.
Never a problem. This is the fun part of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Well, we've been here longer than you, kid.
We're actually going to focus on this house, so we're not going to show you the address.
Well, sure. What's wrong with our house?
It just didn't have the name that popped out when I was doing the research originally.
What was the name that popped out?
I can't remember off the top of my head. So this home behind me was the home of Donald and Grace Lingard. Donald Lingard was born in 1915 and raised and educated here in Lethbridge. He was employed by Canada Packers from 1935 to 1943. In 1943, he signed up with the Canadian Army, serving with the military until 1945. He then went to work with the family business, the Independent Meat Market, at 450 5th Street South, which he worked at, owned, and operated until his passing. He was a member of the Legion, the Masonic Lodge, and the Retail Merchants Association, and was a past president of the Associated Canadian Travelers. When Donald Lingard passed away in April 1969, his widow Grace sold the business to Roger Baxter. We'll see her. I always like when I'm accurate.
She moved to Lakeside. Her son bought, who was the car dealer? Yeah, this goes back into the late 60s. He bought a convertible, a Grand Am, I think it was, convertible with air conditioning.
Oh,
Back then, that was kind of weird.
that seems like an expense. Well, we will see you around the neighborhood. Oh, that's not good to hear. Hi. Hi. Morning. All right, we're at this one here. So, oh, that'll be fine.
We're just doing a James walk for our neighborhood, so he might be on Facebook.
So this home, when it was built, was the home of George and Vera Ostafachuk. Now, as I was looking at names of some of the people who lived in the Glendale area early on, I actually found it interesting how many of them were connected to Vauxhall in the Retlaw area where I grew up. Many of them retired into this community after they finished farming. The Ostafachuks were some of them. George Ostafachuk was born in Romania and came to southern Alberta in 1908. To make his way to southern Alberta, he spent 17 days on the ocean traveling between Europe and Montreal, then a few months in Montreal prior to heading west, and then a week on the train that brought him from Montreal to Lethbridge. Upon arrival in Lethbridge, he went to work in the coal mines, working in number 3, Staffordville mine, and number 6, the Hardyville mine. He married Vera Vazari here in Lethbridge in 1913. Vera had also been born in Romania. Her brother had come out to Lethbridge first, and then she followed him. For her, it was 16 days on the ocean, and her daughter, who lives here in Lethbridge and is in her 90s, said that her mom came by cattle liner. George and Vera met in Staffordville, where so many Eastern European families congregated. For the first 15 years of their life, they lived here in the Lethbridge area as he worked in the coal mines. But in 1928, the family moved to Vauxhall, where they farmed until 1950, at which time they moved back to Lethbridge and here to Glendale. Now, for those of you who are on the tour and not from Vauxhall, that's probably enough information. But for those from Vauxhall, a little more detail. The Ostafachuks farmed on the flats, and their homestead 1 mile north of Oxel is now the Lions Campground. The family planted the large old trees that are still there around the campground. After 10 years on the flats there north of Oxel, in 1938 they moved to Grantham. Wherever they lived, Vera always ensured they were surrounded by lovely flowers and a large vegetable garden. When they were out in the Vauxhall area, families from the dryland area used to come to her house for fresh produce. Here in Lethbridge, Vera's garden in the front yard was mostly geraniums and chrysanthemum, and a picture of her garden actually showed up in the Lethbridge Herald. Now we have to move down to 6th Avenue South, and we're going to start with actually Leonard M. Boucher's house, who, if you remember from the beginning of our tour, was one of the developers of the Glendale neighborhood. We could be like Pied Pipers and get people joining us. We have another block before another house. Okay, I'm a little bit envious of those. I wish I had more raised garden beds in my yard. Hello. You've got one of the yards that should have space for everything. Trees, yes. This one even has their name on it, so they're not showing. So we're here now just past 25th Street on 6th Avenue, and between 25th Street and 26th Street we have a couple of interesting houses. As I mentioned earlier, Leonard M. Boucher, who was one of the developers of Glendale, lived here in the neighborhood. He thought enough of the neighborhood to build his own house here on the north side of 6th Avenue. On the south side of 6th Avenue, somebody who was called the Quiet Mayor lived in Glendale. The house across from us was the home of Mayor Andy Anderson. Andy Anderson was born in Illinois in 1910 and came with his parents to Champion, Alberta in 1912. He graduated in pharmacy from the University of Alberta in 1934 and was employed at Kitson Pharmacy in Lethbridge for 14 years. In 1948, he started his own business, which became Anderson's Medical Dental Pharmacy. In 1950, 2 years after starting his own business, he became interested in civic politics and was elected to the Lethbridge School Board. Community service for him included 14 years on the school board, 3 years on the City Recreation Commission, 34 years with the Rotary, a lifetime membership in the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce, membership on the University Senate and Board of Governors, a member of St. Michael's Hospital Board, member of the Alberta Housing Council, and on and on. After 14 years on the school board, he tried his hand for city council. And he became an alderman in 1964 and was chosen by his fellow councillors as mayor upon the resignation of Mayor Frank Schering in March of 1968. In September 1984, Andy Anderson got the record of being the longest serving mayor in the history of the city. And even though he got the record, he didn't let that stop him, continuing to serve as mayor until 1986. Anderson was a central figure in many important developments in Lethbridge. He was involved with the establishment of the university, the expansion of Lethbridge onto the west side, the sale of the city's power plant, in downtown redevelopment, in the relocation of the railway, and in building of a new city hall. The only one he didn't actually get achieved was the construction of a new city hall during his term. Now, this is actually a quote from Alex Johnson, a past historian of Lethbridge. Anderson was largely instrumental in obtaining many millions of dollars from senior governments for the benefit of the city of Lethbridge. His success lay in a deliberate attempt to be non-controversial, to marshal all the facts, to reach a consensus in council, and then to persuade voters of the correctness of the action. Political opportunists and pressure groups of various stripes surfaced in opposition at all stages of the various developments, but mostly their very names have been forgotten. That's what should always happen to your opposition, right? No. Andy Anderson, as I said, remained mayor until 1986 and is still the longest serving Lethbridge mayor. Anderson Hall at the University of Lethbridge was named in his honor, as was the Anderson Industrial Park in North Lethbridge. He was made a member of the Order of Canada in 1985 and passed away in 1996, and for a time was a Glendale resident. Now, as we move a little bit further along, I'm going to ask if anybody remembers Derry Hill, because there is a connection to Derry Hill in a house just at the other end of this block. From the records I've been able to find so far, Dr. S.M. Schmaltz was the first person to live here in this home, but the person with whom it might be better known is Stanley Faby. Stanley Faby was born in Calgary in 1914, but raised and educated here in Lethbridge. In his youth, he worked for his father and with his brothers at the family business of Purity Dairy. Stan and his brother Romeo bought the business from their father in the 1930s. Also in the 1930s, Stanley was married. He married Antoinette Nettie Locatelli at St. Patrick's Church here in Lethbridge. By the time the two were married, the dairy was well established on, as I mentioned earlier, Derry Hill, the coulee crest overlooking the Old Man River Valley near what's now 10th Avenue South. Stanley and Nettie lived on top of the dairy at that site. Nettie said she didn't like it because when Stan was out at meetings at night, she could hear the milk cans popping and clanking down below, and it always made her nervous. They stayed there on Derry Hill for the first 7 years of their marriage until 1943, when the brothers bought the Majestic Theatre and the dairy was moved. From 1948 to 1959, Stan operated the dairy plant in Messenhat. As the business expanded, the family moved back to Lethbridge and here to Glendale and to this home. He would retire a couple of decades later from the family business. Stanley Faby, unfortunately, was killed on 5th August 1992 following an accident. He was riding a bicycle on 43rd Street when he was hit by a truck. We'll now move on to our next stop. Our next couple of houses are across the street on the south side of 6th Avenue. We know that Mayor Anderson lived a little bit further back, so I've often wondered how much actual politics was done on this street. Because not only did the mayor live along here, so too did an alderman. Well, technically an alderwoman, but such was not the name. Bert B. Fulkins lived first in this house, according to the Henderson directories, and then the Hall family. We're only going to do a brief stop here because we were hoping that their daughter would be able to join us, and hopefully next year, as things get more normal again, she'll be able to. So just a brief mention, though, of who Liz Hall was. Liz Hall was born in England in October 1924 and attended private schools in Britain and was among numerous British children evacuated to Canada during the Second World War. She returned to England during the middle of the war in 1943 and served in the British Army as an ambulance driver from 1943 to 1946. In July 1946, she married Dr. Robert Hall, and the family came to Canada in 1958. Hall was a member of the Lethbridge Naturalist Society, active in environmental causes in Lethbridge, and was involved with the Parks and Recreation and River Valley development from 1969 to 1987. Her concern for the environment led her to volunteer in the school system, in outdoor education, and promote urban parks, energy conservation, and waste management. She was also active working with Helen Schuler and after Helen Schuler's death in the development of the Helen Schuler Nature Center. In 1977, Liz Hall was elected to City Council and served on council until 1986 when ill health forced her to resign. During her time on council, Hall was involved in the railway relocation project that moved the rail yards out of the centre of Lethbridge. In addition to her political work, she was actively involved in the Girl Guides and served as the Division Commissioner from 1967 to 73 and became Provincial Training Commissioner in 1983. Liz Hall passed away in October 1987. She had numerous tributes paid to her. Some of the ones I just love. She was a gutsy, determined lady. Dennis O'Connell, Economic Development Officer. She was a very active and concerned member of our society. She had the ability to recognize what she thought was important and work toward achieving her goal. We will miss her. Bill Brown, Urban Parks. And Andy Anderson, again, who was her neighbor of about a block away, said because of her wisdom, Lethbridge is a better place to live. What better things could be said about anyone? Just down from the Halls was the Tallstrip home. Sorry as I jump around here. Normally I would have cue cards, but I ran out. So Glenn Tallstrip also lived here on 6th Avenue South. Glenn Tallstrip was born and raised in Raymond and worked in the Raymond Sugar Factory before launching a business in 1946. That year, he started Tallstrip Construction Company here in Lethbridge. 2 years later, he built a coal cleaning and processing plant in Blairmore, handling Stoker coal for Western Canadian Collieries Limited. He operated that business until 1951, at which point he sold it. The Tallstrip Company then moved into the sand and gravel business, mainly crushing gravel for ballast for CP. A second company, Tallstrip Sand and Gravel, was formed in 1963. Highway building and paving later became a mainstay for the business, with the company employing as many as 200 people during a peak period of paving during the summer. The company's highway division, though, was sold in 1974. Tallstrip Sand and Gravel, of course, still remains here in Lethbridge. Glenn Tallstrip died in October 1980, doing what I was told was his favorite game. He died during a round of golf. So we're going to continue walking a little bit further east on 6th, and then we're going to head north on 27th Street and swing back around to 5th Avenue.
So when does this appear on Facebook?
It's already on, it's live. Everything we say is actually going right now.
How do I get it?
It's the Glendale Dieppe Facebook page.
You talk about Glenn Tallstrip
Yep.
on the 5th hole of the country club. I was with him.
Really?
Yeah.
It's always good to die doing what you love, isn't it? Not in front of other people, but...
Well, his comment was before he teed off, Roy, I have an awful headache.
Oh,
It's in trouble because I went to the horse races last night. Put that as a
okay, thank you. 27th Street. Almost to the far end of our neighborhood, but not quite. We don't want to cross into Dieppe, do we, Jen? I am joking, of course. Actually, today you can't even tell the difference between them. They have a slightly different history, but that's about it. But you guys were more militant. We're going to be at this one here. Hello. So in the early 1950s, Agnes Frake was living in this home. But in the late 1950s and certainly by 1960, this is the home of Harry and Myra Ing. They are living there, and they lived there at least until the 1990s. Harry Ing was born and raised in Canton, China, and came to Canada going to Saskatchewan in 1918. He moved to Lethbridge in 1945 and operated the Liberty grocery store and later Ing's Groceteria on 9th Avenue South. He was also the co-owner of the New Moon Cafe and retired in 1976. Some of my favorite posts on social media and online sources are the posts and the shares and the comments people make about their favorite restaurants and confectionaries in Lethbridge. People have incredible memories about going there, the candies they would buy, how much things would cost, and certainly Harry Ing and the businesses he operated are part of that story of Lethbridge. Those confectionaries and restaurants are such an essential part of our community. Places you could pick up the essentials. As I said, you could get the candy. They're a great part of our neighborhood. And not only did we have one of them just over on 28th Street, but we also have here someone who operated one of those several of those confectionaries. All right, we're going to move a little further along. To get our attention or the dogs. Oh, baby weeping birch. It's going to take a while to come along. We have so many old, beautiful ones in this neighborhood. Yeah. And then, of course, get amazing views of the elevator. So it's the blue and white one across we're going to reference. Also living here on 27th Street from at least 1953, perhaps a bit earlier, to the mid-1960s at least, were the Lomas family, George and Roberta, who I've seen more often recorded as Bert. George Webb Wilbur Lomas was born in Burdett. He served overseas in the military from 1939 to 1945 with the Canadian Army. After the war, he was employed as a life underwriter and manager for 40 years with the Canada Life Assurance Company. He was president of the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce from 1964 and was an active member of the Shrine Club as well as potentate of the LHS Temple in 1973, and he too called our Glendale Dieppe neighborhood home. Now we're going to go around the corner and just down, and we're going to end with two more people who lived in our neighborhood who have a Retlaw or Vauxhall connection, and I didn't pick them deliberately for that, but I just think it's funny. We'll kind of go to the alley, then we can do both of the last houses at once without being too close. Because it's going to be this one and the one in the corner. This house here was the home of George and Helen Nell Forchuk. George Forchuk was born and raised and educated in Ukraine, and he came to Canada in 1908. He was 20 years old when he came to Canada, and he had heard of the great opportunities here in this country. He arrived at Halifax in May and worked his way across the country, finally arriving in Lethbridge in November of 1908. When he arrived, he worked here in Lethbridge and around the area at any job he could, from pouring cement on the city streets to unloading boxcars. Finally, he was able to get a job in the mines and to work in the area. In 1912, he sent back to Ukraine for his betrothed, Helen. She was able to make it to Calgary, or make it here into Canada, and they were married on the 20th of July, 1912. In 1916, the couple, tried homesteading at Retlaw. Now, if you know anything about the Retlaw area, it is dry land, and while they had a few good years, they then hit some dry years, and they had a few hard years to go. So what he did is he would leave her and the children there on the farm, and he came back to Lethbridge and did coal mining and hauled coal in the Lethbridge months. That meant he had to travel back and forth between Lethbridge and Retlaw. Eventually there was a train, and then in 1920 he bought a Model T so he could go from the mine to the farm and visit with Lena and the children who were there on it. After working on that plot around Retlaw for 14 years, in 1930 they moved to irrigated land at Vauxhall. It would actually be northeast of Vauxhall out by the Bow River, and they lived there until 1950. Now, I don't know if they were the reason for it or if it was the next generation of Forchuks. All I remember about the Forchuk farm is amazing Saskatoons. In the 1950s, the couple retired here into Lethbridge, into the Glendale area. George was an active outdoorsman, and he and Helen remained here for several years. Now, across the street on the other corner is the Chester and Violet Merriman house. Now, Donald Rice actually lived in this home before the Merrimans, but then the Merrimans moved in. Chester Merriman was born in North Dakota in 1912, and he moved with his family to Brooks in 1913, and then to Retlaw in 1914. He married Violet Martin on September 13, 1936. Violet, who had been born in 1911 Bow Island, was a registered nurse. Now, Chester, when he moved into Lethbridge, eventually founded a manufacturing company here in Lethbridge in 1944, which later became Pre-Built Industries, known for creating Scamper and Skipper recreation vehicles, and which was a major supplier of industrial camp housing. The company, as I said, started in 1944 with the original name of the Lethbridge Body Works. It built truck boxes for grain and sugar beet vehicles. Pre-Built went on to become one of Canada's largest manufacturers of prefabricated dwellings. It was, as I said, founded by C.O. Merriman, who was co-owner, the firm's first president, and its sole employee at the time. The first year, in 1944, he did $30,000 worth of business. I want you to imagine the 1940s and 50s. As I mentioned earlier, we were in a housing boom, we were in the baby boom, construction boom as well. Living accommodations for work crews were urgently needed at various construction sites in the early 1950s when Western Canada's petroleum, mineral, forest and water resources boom got underway. Capitalizing on this, Pre-Built went into the production of portable industrial camps. By 1968, Pre-Built was manufacturing from a modern 55,000 square foot plant on a 10-acre site. They had hired about 165 craftsmen. Industrial camps accounted for about 50% of the company's total volume. Other products on the market were the Scamper travel trailers and truck campers, which was about 40% of Pre-Built's manufacturing volume. Merriman set down a policy early on for his company. Growth for growth's sake only does not necessarily make for a healthy company, he said. The company's first obligation is to the people who have made success possible, the industrial camp clients and Scamper dealers in Western Canada. Now, in 1988, think of that year, That was the year of the Calgary Stampede, the Winter Games in Calgary. Scamper and Pre-Built was Lethbridge's major Olympic connection. They actually provided, we'll let these big trucks just go by, there's one more coming. As long as Jen doesn't get hit on the road. For the relay for the torch, Scamper provided 5 220-foot mini motor home that was actually in a caravan attached to the torch relay. The caravan was used for transporting and meeting the needs of the runners, the medical and sport therapy teams, relay officials, the Olympic mascots, and a photojournalist crew. 1988 was a highlight for Pre-Built Industries and for Lethbridge, and as you might guess, in 1989, Scamper left Lethbridge. Never a good story. Violet and Chester always enjoyed fishing, golfing, and traveling together, either for business or pleasure. He passed away in 1998, Violet in 1999. We have one last house, just another block or so long. Ah, the sounds of a commuting. Grass is being mowed, dogs, birds. I don't think we'll go all the way down, because I should have done that one before we went down 24th Street. So on 6th Avenue lived Leonard M. Boucher. He didn't remain there long. As I said, he was one of the developers. Here on 5th Avenue, a couple blocks over on 24th Street and 5th Avenue, there was another Boucher, Irvin and Barbara Boucher. Irvin Boucher was born in Wetaskiwin in 1907 and came to Lethbridge the same year. As a young man, he worked as a salesperson for Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. He then started his own company called Paint Contracting Company, running it for decades. And he was a painter, designer, decorator for many decades of his life. In addition to painting, decorating, designing, he was also a boxer. And in 1924-25, Irvin Boucher was the Alberta Provincial Boxing Champion in his class. I was able to find a bit of a quote about his abilities. The only entry in the former class, lightweight, was Irvin Boucher of this city, who tipped the scales at 134.5 pounds at the official weighing in, and qualified to compete in the lightweight class in the finals by taking a very snappy exhibition bout with Lieutenant L. Carter of the RCAF at High River. Boucher, who is only 17 years of age, is a very promising young boxer and in thorough training for the coming contest. We shall look for him to go far in the finals. In 1926, following his provincial championship, he was actually slated to enter the Dominion finals. Not only was he a boxer, but we see his name coming up often with hockey and other sports as well in the newspaper at that time. He was a lifelong member of the Elks and, towards the end of his life, a resident of St. Michael's Health Centre, passing away in June of 2000. So you'll notice we only did sort of a wraparound block here of 5th and 6th Avenue between 24th and 27th Street, including, of course, Shoppers World. We still have that whole area here north of 5th Avenue, but that's going to have to wait for another Jane's Walk on another year. As always, please let us know, comment, ask questions. If you have stories here of other parts of Glendale, or if you have stories of Dieppe, we don't know yet where we'll be doing our tours next year and what we'll be including. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, see you in the community.